This lecture specifically discusses the peripheral nervous system. In this lecture with the peripheral nervous system, we're going to talk about first how it serves our body, but we're also going to see that the peripheral nervous system is divided into two divisions, the somatic and the autonomic division. And the autonomic division is actually further divided into the parasympathetic and sympathetic division. So we're going to just kind of talk about how these are organized and what they do for us in our bodies. So the peripheral nervous system in general really talks about every nerve that is outside of our brain and spinal cord. And so specifically the spinal nerves, those nerves that come out of the spinal cord, as we see in the center of this image here, the yellow structures that we see extending out, those are our spinal nerves. And each of these nerves serves a different part of the body, and they are organized into roots. We have what are called dorsal roots and ventral roots. And basically how these are organized is the dorsal roots, which are near our back. So think like dolphins have a dorsal fin. Dorsal is near your back. The dorsal roots have this kind of large bulge in them, and that bulge is called the dorsal root ganglion. That ganglion actually contains cell bodies. It contains the cell bodies of sensory neurons, those neurons that are responsible for detecting things like smell, temperature changes, pain, things like that. The ventral roots, they don't really have that bulge, instead they're just kind of this long extension, and those attach near the front or the belly side of your spinal cord. And they contain motor neurons. So those contain the neurons that are actually going to signal to our muscles to do something. And so what's really kind of cool about this is that all of our sensory information is going to come in towards the back of our spinal cord. And and that would be called our afferent signals. You can think A for arriving to the brain. Eventually, the whole goal is to get us to our brain. And then on the ventral side, we are going to have our efferent signals, or signals that are going to exit, E for exit, the spinal cord. And those efferent signals are going to basically signal to our body that we need to react to the sensory information that we are receiving. So dorsal roots have that big dorsal root ganglion, which contains the cell bodies of our sensory neurons. Ventral roots don't have that big ganglion. They just kind of extend towards the belly side of our spinal cord. So just to kind of remind you, because I'm talking about sensory neurons and motor neurons, I wanted to show you just kind of a quick diagram from your textbook of what is considered a simple reflex arc. So just remember first off that there are three types of neurons: sensory neurons, interneurons, and motor neurons. Really any sensation that we have, say for instance you're holding your finger above a flame, you have receptors, or specifically sensory receptors in your body that are each designed to detect a specific type of sense. And we're going to talk about that when we get into the special senses. But in this example, we have a sensory receptor for pain. So you hold your finger above this flame, your sensory receptors are going to signal like, ouch, that's hot. Again, that information is going to travel from the receptor down the sensory neuron. So notice our impulse direction. We are trying to get towards the brain. So this again is going to be called our afferent signal. Again, the cell body of that sensory neuron, that would be found in the ganglion of the dorsal root. And then typically, in order to get some type of response from our body, that sensory neuron needs to send a signal to an interneuron. Interneurons are often, they can be in the spinal cord. They can often be also in the brain. So we'd find these in both spots, the spinal cord or the brain. But basically that interneuron is going to make a decision, and it's going to say, okay, I feel pain. I need to send a signal that moves my hand away from that pain. So it's going to send an efferent signal, a signal that leaves the brain or spinal cord, and it's going to send that signal down a motor neuron. So notice now our impulse is leaving. Motor neurons always act on a muscle. They're going to tell this muscle, hey, you better contract, and then we get our response, which is to pull our hand away from that hot flame. So reflex arcs, we feel the receptor detects some type of sense. An afferent signal travels, a decision is made at an interneuron. That interneuron then sends an efferent signal. We act on an effector, which in this case is our muscle contracting, and we get some type of response. So just to kind of highlight how all of these neurons work together. So the spinal cords of the peripheral nervous system obviously come out of the spinal cord. There are also cranial nerves that leave from the brain. So really, if the spinal nerves serve kind of all of our body below our neck, the cranial nerves really serve our head and some of our body parts. Remember, in the spinal nerves, we had the dorsal versus the ventral roots. So we were separating the types of neurons that we see in those roots. Dorsal has sensory, ventral has motor. In the cranial nerves, we call these mixed nerves because these nerves contain both sensory and motor neurons, or they can be non-mixed, where they carry only one or the other, similar to the spinal cord. But many of these are mixed, meaning they have both the sensory and the motor neuron that serves that region of the head. And your lab goes through kind of all of the different cranial nerves, and it gives you an acronym to remember, or a mnemonic device to remember those nerves. For this lecture, again, I just want you to know that these are part of our peripheral nervous system. They serve the head and some of our body parts. Some of these guys are mixed, meaning they contain both sensory and motor, or they only carry one or the other. Okay, so basically, again, our peripheral nervous system are the nerves that extend out of our brain or out of our spinal cord. But depending on the type of actions that these nerves kind of cause in the body, we can divide these into two subdivisions. The first being the somatic nervous system. Remember, soma for body, so soma means body. And so really the somatic nervous system is the portion of our nervous system, or our peripheral nervous system, that controls our muscles. So this is what's controlling our voluntary movements, like making decisions to walk, to lift weights, to any type of muscle movement, to take notes, all of that. The somatic nervous system does also allow us to respond to sensations and sight and sound, etc. But largely all of these are under our voluntary control. The autonomic division of the peripheral nervous system is different. Think autonomic for automatic. So this portion of the peripheral nervous system, these cranial and spinal nerves control involuntary actions of our body. So things like our pupils contracting or dilating, things like regulating our digestion, regulating whether we need to pee or not pee, all of the things, regulating our heartbeat, breathing. Really anything that is not under our conscious control is controlled by the autonomic division of the peripheral nervous system. And this portion of the PNS, the peripheral nervous system, is divided into two subdivisions. The parasympathetic division, which we can also think of as like kind of the rest and digest, and the sympathetic division, or the fight or flight kind of division. So just to kind of talk about this more and point out some key differences, I just wanted to zoom in to this figure here. So again, we have our parasympathetic versus our sympathetic nervous system. And notice that of these divisions of the autonomic nervous system, both are the organs that are controlled by both divisions. So for instance, the parasympathetic division controls the eye, so does the sympathetic nervous system. Again, everything kind of here on the right is more of like our flight or fight response. Everything on the left can be considered our rest and digest response. So notice that the parasympathetic, both of these divisions act on the same neurons, but they often have antagonistic effects, meaning that one, for instance with the eye, constricts the pupil while the other dilates the pupil. When you have a fight or flight response, usually you typically start to increase your breathing rate. So your sympathetic nervous system is going to start kind of kicking in and saying, oh, okay, I gotta like build up some oxygen so that I can run or fight. Your parasympathetic does the opposite. It decreases the breathing rate. So notice that both of these divisions of the peripheral nervous system, of the autonomic nervous system, regulate the same organs, but they're doing so in very different ways. So just wanted to point that out for you guys. All right, so that is it for the peripheral nervous system. Again, I will give you guys a study guide of the like what you kind of need to study and know from your labs, but that is it for our videos.